When we talk about blockchain, and whenever I go to these events, we see two very distinct set of interest groups. One is very focused on technology, and they're all technology enthusiasts. One is very business focused. So just by show of hands, how many over here are really technology enthusiasts in blockchain? Okay, and how many of you are business focused? Okay, so good. So it's an equal mix. And I come from Accenture, and today what I'm going to talk to you about really is the business side of blockchain. I will not touch so much on technology. I think we have had enough discussions, but I will dwell a little bit deeper on the business aspects and where do we see the real value coming out of the great technology we are talking about, that is blockchain. So supply chain is not new. It's been around for quite a few years. I started my first supply chain visibility project, way back in the beginning of this century, in beginning of 2001, and this was on enabling supply chain visibility for one of the clients in the US, and we are a bunch of people there trying to solve the visibility problems of supply chain. It was a great experience. About 3 years back, I met one of my classmates, and while talking over a cup of coffee, he said, "Okay, what are you doing now?" And he stayed back in the US. He said, "I'm still solving supply chain visibility problems for another client." And I said, "Yeah, it's been like 18, 19 years, and yeah, I mean, supply chain is such a complex space. It's been there for a long time. Even then, even today, there are so many challenges that exist in supply chain, and people have been trying to solve it, but there is just no end." And then we started thinking, did we really choose the right field as a profession? It just doesn't die down, and supply chain is like ferrying boxes from one place to the other. It is not at all a very glamorous industry to be in. It kind of it gets boring after a while. And then the discussion went over, "Okay, have you heard about blockchain?" So he said, "Yeah, I've read about it. What do you think about it?" And so as the discussion progressed, we said, "Okay, maybe supply chain is not that boring. Maybe there is something more to it. Maybe there is something new to it. Let's start working towards it." And over the last 3 years, we have formed a group, and we have been talking about it very often. And suddenly, we see that we are in a space today which is extremely exciting. In fact, supply chain space has never been so exciting than what it is today. So the impact of blockchain, and as we try to dig more into it and find more value, it's absolutely growing leaps and bounds day by day as we enter more and more industries, as we think about more and more use cases. So now with that, let me then start for those of you who are kind of not so very familiar with supply chain, but it's a complex set of ecosystem. So I have 2-tier suppliers sending material. At the end of the day, it is all about moving goods from one place or from the suppliers to manufacturer and to the end customer, and the whole motive is having the right goods at the right time at the right place. So having said that, what are the key challenges that are there today? Even after so many years, even after spending millions and billions of dollars on IT infrastructure, there still remain some basic fundamental problems. I still do not have the visibility to data the way I wanted. If somebody says that I have complete visibility across my supply chain, that is absolutely incorrect. Even today, companies are spending sleepless nights on how do I get the real visibility into the right level of data with the right set of people. This whole industry is extremely closed. It's, as I said, complex, but again closed to the effect that it is very difficult to make changes happen. It is because we have been running these systems and these processes for a long time. It is difficult to make a change within my enterprise, but more so with more peoples with whom I'm transacting. So that's extremely big challenge over here. Thirdly, there is lack of traceability of products in the entire extended supply chain. I can have at best the visibility to my near partners, could be suppliers, could be distributors, but the moment I go one level up or one level down, I tend to lose that visibility and traceability. And that leads to a lot of problems. And if you think about some of the numbers, the financial impact is huge. One of them is like the counterfeit products that are there in the supply chain today. Some numbers talk about $500 billion. Some numbers go even above that. But essentially, counterfeiting is an extremely difficult problem today in supply chain. More so, and I come from a high-tech industry background. I work in that industry for quite some time now. The counterfeit products that we see here is a big challenge today for all our customers and all the organizations which supply products in this space. If I go to a slightly different industry, pharma, this problem is compounded. And here we are talking about not only billions of dollars lost because of lost sales. I'm actually talking about lives at stake. So you might have, and there are again some numbers over there, but lives are getting lost due to counterfeit drugs in the marketplace. And that's a profound problem. Here we are talking much beyond impacts which go much beyond mere dollars, but this is like impacting the life and of human beings over here. So the counterfeiting, the lack of traceability, the lack of visibility is still a big problem in supply chain. The other big one over there is product recalls. And there were news. There was a recent news in the papers like last week on problems with a certain fleet of aircrafts. That's again a big problem. It is risking lives of people because of again some things that went wrong upstream in the supply chain. So having said that, why does blockchain really really a new ray of hope over here? Why are we thinking that blockchain will solve some of these problems? If you take the fundamental properties or fundamental characteristics of blockchain, wherever we see multiple parties in an ecosystem, wherever collaboration is important, wherever we see the transaction validation being maintained by multiple parties, blockchain really comes into picture. Blockchain really is a fundamental change in conducting business, and we are talking about a complete change of doing business, and I will go deeper into it. But having said that, what are those top 4 advantages that blockchain brings to the table? First and foremost is provenance. So we can, with the help of blockchain and distributed ledger technology now, really track and trace the origin of the product or its component right upstream and to the level of origin. Provenance becomes important. I won't say it is tamper-proof. I will say it is tamper-evident. So if somebody wants to tamper in my ledger, I know who is doing that, and if a record is changed, then I can really trace back in to all my ecosystem players to see who did that. Thirdly, we can really control, so who sees data, who sees what kind of data, who can create what kind of transactions, who can transact with whom. All of that is perfectly possible through blockchain and the channels in blockchain. And last and not the least, security. And we debated that half an hour back, but at the end of the day, it is still one of the most secure mechanisms that I have that can really improve the whole trust within my whole supply chain. So these 4 fundamental things change the way that we run supply chains today. Now, this is what I'll do now is dig a little bit deeper into how this can change. I mean, a lot of people are talking about supply chains getting transformed, but where are the use cases? Where will the value come from? If you look at a traditional supply chain model, this is how it looks. So I have got a material supplier, a contract manufacturer on the left-hand side. I got an end customer on the right-hand side. And if I try to map the number of times messages get exchanged, and there are so many intermediaries in between, I can start right from the way forecasting is done I exchange forecasts with the customers to how an order is placed, a PO is raised, how invoicing happens. And if you look at this, these are, it's a very complex system. There are so many transactions happening, so many different types of standards being followed by different organizations, and it's a very complex mesh. And this is only for one customer. If I talk about 10,000 customers and 10,000 suppliers, it's all like very complex, right? So what does and how does blockchain really help us solve that? It's again a very simplified view. What I can really do is have all the parties as nodes in my ecosystem, and all these nodes become an ecosystem. And whenever a transaction happens in the supply chain, right from forecasting till let's say invoicing or even reverse logistics, all of that gets written into the block. And what that does is it really gives me a very complete traceability of whatever transactions that have happened, and every participant in the whole blockchain ecosystem now has the same level of visibility into the data. So that really improves a whole lot of trust and visibility in the blockchain and in the whole ecosystem. Having said that, and now I'll go to my initial slide. What are the various use cases that we see adding value, we see getting adopted in the industry today? And if I start from my upstream supply chain, the whole sourcing and procurement today is a extremely complex thing to do, especially if you talk about regulations in the industry. If I am a consumer, how do I know that whatever products have gone into, let's say, a laptop I use or a mobile phone that I use, how do I know that what is the origin of those products? Have they been sourced reliably? Have they been procured from the right sources that that is promised of me? Blockchain really helps in getting the visibility to my uppermost level of supply chain. And let's say tomorrow I'm going to a store and pick up maybe a jar of coffee. There are technologies available today which can tell you the exact provenance of the coffee bean. So and same as the case today, let's say with the pharmaceutical products. For more complex products like, let's say, a laptop or even an aircraft, what is really important is have all the suppliers met regulatory standards, quality standards that have been promised. If I am manufacturing, let's say, an aircraft today, how do I know that my fourth level of supplier really confirmed to the quality standard that I have asked my supplier to really adhere to? And that is where I can actually have suppliers coming onto the blockchain for forming a digital thread on the supply side to really have the complete transparency of the materials being supplied. The other thing, and a lot of you might have heard about CPFR, collaborative planning, forecasting, replenishment. Blockchain really gives you the fundamental now structure to enable a true CPFR. A lot of players have tried doing CPFR. It's a very complex thing to do. Again, having all the suppliers, or I can even talk about from the customer side, having all the players come together and exchange data in a trustworthy manner, right from my forecast to my order book to my inventory status. It is a very complex thing to do. It is not possible because there are again issues of trust within the different players. Blockchain really helps us with that, and that really forms the fundamental shift of conducting business within supply chain. I can actually have a true CPFR running with my be it suppliers or on the customer side. When I talk about all the channel sales and distribution, if you take the case of electronic goods, right? Now the way that the distribution happens for electronic goods, the OEMs, they supply, could be a contract manufacturer, they supply to let's say the high-tech organizations, then they supply to at least a couple of layers. The life cycle of the product is shrinking every day, and there are price cuts during, let's say, a 12-month period. Now, whenever that happens, the inventory gets devalued. Inventory could be with, let's say, a distributor, could be with a retailer, but there's a devaluation of inventory. And what that really leads to is, the inventory price protection claims being raised by the retailers or the distributors back to the suppliers. Now, how do I really, make sure that whatever claims are getting raised are really true? How do I know that the sales and inventory figures are, whatever is being claimed is true? If you are, entering into a blockchain world, and I can actually tie every event or every sale that has happened with a timestamp and the party which is doing it on the block, and I have a traceability, I do not really need to do all these reconciliations or financial reconciliations. And I could go on with more use cases over there. Same is the case with asset-heavy industries in which there is a long life cycle or a long life period of an asset in the field. Once it gets installed and it gets serviced over, let's say, a 10 to 15-year time frame, how does the OEM know what is the most recent or the most current bill of material of that asset? Blockchain, again, helps you to really track those changes in the BOM in the field. So this is a very high-level view. What I'll do is maybe take one example and maybe dwell a little bit deeper into it. This is an example from the logistics industry. Now, logistics, if you talk about ocean freight, if you talk about air freight or even road freight, 90% of goods that that get transacted in the world actually go through the ocean freight. Now, it's a very simplified way of representation of logistics flow, but if you start from a customer and a shipper, initially, they enter into what we call as the master services agreement, and and then there are agreements with the carrier that a shipper gets into. They will typically sit across the table and decide, okay, for every kilometer and every kg of load, what could be the charges, and then all those agreements are then formed into an MSA. It gets stored into typically a CLM or a contracts lifecycle management system within a shipper, and the same is then stored by the carrier as well. Now, every time a purchase order is raised by a customer to a shipper, that gets stored in the customer system. The shipper will then raise a delivery order based on that, and based on his supply, he will raise a delivery order to what we call as the distribution center, which is a lot of times outsourced. There's a freight management vendor who will normally consolidate all the freight movement. And then it will tell the carrier, okay, come and pick up the goods from the DC and deliver it to a particular customer. In doing all of this, I don't think you will be able to read all the EDI numbers, but typically, these happen through a lot of EDI messages, and there are standards, could be Edifact standards, could be ANSI standards, could be Rosetta Net standards in exchanging data. But essentially what is happening is, for a single PO that was raised by the customer, the information is getting replicated in every single step that follows. So if I have a delivery order, the 90% of information remains the same, but only a couple of fields get added in a DO. And same is the case with, be it a load tender, be it an ASN, or be it even the bill of lading. Every time the information gets replicated in a different system, and with only a very small delta getting added. And what this really leads to is what we call as the hall of mirrors. The same data getting replicated in multiple parties and multiple systems, and that's the fundamental reason of why we need reconciliation. So at the end of the day, if whenever an invoice is raised by the carrier for a proof of delivery that has happened, what research shows is even today with all the technologies that we have, about 8 to 10% of invoices get in a disputed territory. So the shipper would say, okay, I want to send let's say 100 units from place A to place B. through a baud lane C, and finally the invoice that he gets is maybe from A to B, but through a different baud lane, or through a different pricing term, or he shipped 100 but the customer got only 98. Now this leads to a lot of disputes. The disputes typically, an invoice gets disputed, it typically goes into an escrow account, and then everybody employs what we call as the settlement houses to really settle those disputes. And if you talk about the logistics industry today, it's multi-trillion-dollar industry. And if you talk about 8 to 10% of invoices getting disputed for a customer who has $1 billion freight bill in an year, 10% is a huge money. So this is money not being able to use. This is money which is really disputed, and it's really increases the working capital needs of the organization. Now, how can I really solve it through blockchain? I can actually have, let's say when the rate card or when the MSA was actually signed between the parties, that gets stored on a ledger. That is shared across the participants on the block. Now, every time a transaction happens after this, there are smart contracts in place which do checks and balances. And every time there is a PO or shipment or a way bill, all of the information gets stored in the block, and it always, there is a reference check with not only the MSA, but also with the transaction that happened just prior to that. So if the transaction is, it does not conform with, let's say, the transaction that has happened earlier, or it doesn't conform with the MSA, blockchain will not really allow you to post entries into that. So that really brings in a real-time efficiency in the way that I'm conducting business. It brings in efficiency in the sense that I'm not able to conduct business unless and until I conform to the standards that have been set forth in the MSA or in any document for that matter, which is a legal binding document. So, and then we talked about IoT and IoT getting clubbed into this. And if I really bring in all these flavors of IoT and RFID and all of that, it really brings a lot of more efficiencies in the way that I'm conducting business. I can actually have an automated three-way matching of invoice. And today when an invoice is raised, it goes to a finance department. Somebody does a check of what was the PO, what was the SO, and then finally the amount is paid. But here, since I know that every transaction is really trustworthy, and that is what blockchain brings to the table, I can have automated three-way match and payments being released automatically. And that really brings down the complete outstanding, could be receivables outstanding, could be payables outstanding. It really brings down a whole lot of that working capital requirement. So this is a very specific use case in logistics. And I mean, I could go into more details, but at the end of the day, every use case requires a solid business case and an ROI. Unless and until we have that, it is not just a technology implementation that we are going to do. And those of you who know about supply chains, the Supply Chain Council, the Global Supply Chain Council, which is the non-profit organization across the globe, has laid out something called as supply chain performance parameters, and it tracks performance across 5 different parameters: reliability, speed, agility, cost, and assets. And for every use case that we build, let's say here I was talking about the 10% invoice reconciliation errors, I can actually map it back to my supply chain performance impacts. Okay, if I don't have these reconciliation errors, my cost is going to go down drastically, or my asset utilization is going to really go up, because I can now have more efficiencies run into that. Same thing if there's a late delivery dispute. Reliability is something which is extremely important for driving supply chain performance. If I have complete visibility into supply chain, I'm really talking about a whole lot of impact on reliability and getting the OTIFs. That is the all-time in full to a completely new levels. And then similarly, I can map for every benefit that I derive out of use case, I then map to supply chain performance parameters. With this, I can really arrive at a solid business case for an implementation that I can then start talking about then technology which can support. There are a couple of others. I will not rather go into it. Maybe this is again a good one, the digital thread. So a lot of you might have heard about a digital thread and digital twin. Now we've taken an example of here, and I work in this industry. So all the aircraft manufacturers now take any complex bill of material, take any equipment that has a long life over in the field. The moment that that sale is made and it is deployed in the field, whenever there is a maintenance or whenever it breaks down, a lot of service players can actually come and do changes to that configuration, what we call as the as-maintained configuration or as-maintained BOM. Now, these service providers may not really be contracted by the OEMs, may not really be having visibility to the OEMs, and hence the original equipment manufacturer who has developed a part really loses track of the configuration over an as-maintained configuration over a period of time. Now tomorrow if there's a problem and when he tries to solve the problem, he will open, let's say, that equipment and he finds that a completely new part which is, let's say, not certified or not authenticated lying inside his equipment. That really then multiplies the problem manyfold and gives to a whole lot of new new complications. Now, how blockchain can really help over here? If an asset is being deployed in the field like an aircraft across, it can literally fly across the globe. I can have all the certified MROs and all the certified suppliers on the block. I form an ecosystem along with let's say the airlines, the aircraft manufacturing company, the MROs, and whenever there is a scheduled maintenance or breakdown maintenance, I can actually track the configuration of that aircraft on the block. Now, what that means is really giving the visibility back to the suppliers for the most recent configuration of an aircraft. Now, that really helps you to maximize what everybody strives for in the industry, which is maximization of the airtime for an aircraft. So every hour that an aircraft is grounded, organizations lose more than $50,000 for every hour. So this has again a very profound impact on the complete ecosystem, not just a couple of players over there. So why is this a very big change? And I'm really being an optimist, in this room. So, as more and more, and traditionally the supply chains have been, really linear. I supply to a supplier, supplies to its next level of supplier. They supply to a manufacturer, then to a customer. More and more we see today. Today we see convergence of industries happening. People who are coming in, let's say, autonomous cars, nobody thought that they would enter into this market. Those who have been pure play technology players are building autonomous cars today. They are entering into insurance business. They are entering into healthcare business. So partnerships are getting formed across the industries today. You no longer see a very closed loop supply chain today. And although the movement of goods would still be linear, the amount of information that you need to share with your ecosystem will only grow day by day. And what blockchain really gives you is that fundamental infrastructure to have a very trusted relationship with all your ecosystem partners. So instead of having and needing to send data linearly, I can have a closed loop supply chain. I can have a closed loop ecosystem sharing data with my partners across industries and not only in my industry. So it's a very a profound change that we are talking about over here. Now, I talked about most of these. It is completely a new way of doing business. Please don't look at these changes as piecemeal approaches or I'm trying to solve let's say one small problem. Although in every case, of course, I start with a use case, I develop on that, I build a POC on that, I pilot that, but please keep the end result in mind, the overall objective in mind. Now, finally, a lot of times people ask, okay, and I think in the morning we discussed, about AI and quantum computing and IoT and all of that. Now, where does blockchain really fit into all of this? And the way we represent this is, I'm sorry about this, maybe people at the back cannot read it, but I will read it for you. So if you look at, and please read this slide bottom up. In the bottom, really, I have my perform layer, which is really people working on tools, on machinery, producing parts, supplying goods, and that is where the human to machine interface happens. On top of it is something what I call as the transact layer, which is all my ERPs, CRMs, and IBPs of the world. These are the systems on which organizations have invested billions of dollars over years, and these a lot of times people ask, are ERPs going to go? Are supply chain systems going to go? So this really explains they will remain where they are. But what I'm now talking about is the transport layer, which is the blockchain networks layer on top of the transact layer. Now these blockchain networks will really form the intercompany visibility layers on top of my transaction layer. And on this blockchain network, then I can do, on top of it, I can use the visibility platforms, or I can base all my visibility solutions on base of this platform. Now, a big problem with AI, as I think in the morning somebody pointed out, is bad data. If the data is biased, of course it will lead to bad decisions. With blockchain and with the visibility that blockchain provides, I am sure that the data is, the authenticity of data veracity is taken care of. I know that the data is good, and hence on the top of it, I can actually, deploy a lot of, artificial intelligence and machine learning algorithms to generate insights, and that is where my analyze layer, sits on top of it. And finally, there is the control layer in which I can actually run all my exception management, the SLA management that based on all the analytics that has been provided on the foundation. What parameters do I need to change within my supply chain to have address the intelligent insights coming out of my layer below? So this is the workflow system in which I can again do a lot of workflow automation and RPA, or fundamentally do a lot of self-healing things in which I can then run the business. And if you look at the top, I can actually deploy this across all of my supply chain functions, right from quoting to plan, source, make, deliver, return, the way that we have as per the SCORE model. So this really explains, or is a way of representing how will blockchain really in the world of tomorrow work with different systems, and could be AI and IoT and all of the systems together. I think this is my last slide, but before I close, I just wanted to share with you, I think in the morning there were some discussions on, hey, are we ready today? Are organizations really implementing this? Is it really a business value over here? So if you look at it, the promise it holds really is the promise that internet held about 20, 25 years back, or maybe 30 years back. So if you look at it, www or HTTP was born, I think, in 91. Amazon got created, I think, in 94. And the rest, as they say, is history. We have seen enterprise-grade blockchains coming up, I think, in the last couple of years, which I can really trust and I can really deploy within the enterprise and really transact business. This is just a beginning. And what we see and what we feel is, it has got such a profound impact that in the years to come, and let's not look, near term, hey, 6 months down the line, is somebody doing it? It absolutely holds a lot of promise in the long run. It has been a little bit slow to start, but that is true of any new technology. I mean, even when, I was chatting with someone, when the news channels were launched, people thought, oh, who is going to really listen to a news channel? Do I really switch on the TV to listen to news? But now you know how, that industry has grown. And we can quote a number of examples. Even when the computer was invented, people did not really, put a lot of their money on personal computers. But now, personal computing is really the way. So, just to summarize then, supply chain industry has been there, will be there. It's a very complex and a very big industry. There has been a lot of technologies, which have been used to optimize my supply chain. But the promise that blockchain brings to the table is absolutely phenomenal, is absolutely profound, and has got the really the levers to fundamentally change the way that I conduct business. And it will absolutely see a lot of adoption going forward, and supply chains will be very different in about 10 years time from now than what we see today. So let me take a pause there. We can absolutely take some questions. I don't know how am I doing on time.
Like the supply chain use case that you showed, it requires all the players in the supply chain to be on the blockchain. Like there might be some players who are still operating on paper, or they don't have proper IT infrastructure. So how do we manage the?
It's a very valid question, and I think that is a fundamental question in which a lot of our clients and organizations are currently dealing with. So the technology is there. The bigger challenge is really to bring your partners on the block. And the way that we approach this is you have to show them what's in it for them. If you take only a very centralized view of how it is going to benefit me, then there is no way that you're going to succeed. Blockchain, as I said, is absolutely a cross or an inter-company way of doing business. There is no blockchain use case for an enterprise. It has to be with more players, and the way that we do it is you identify a player or a couple of players who are interested in doing that, do a small POC, do a pilot first, show the value. And once you show the value for that particular player, I'm sure you can approach multiple people over there.
So in this case, say, just a follow-up. So consider a single supplier, he might end up being part of multiple blockchain network, right?
Right. Right. So, and you're very right. I mean, the way, if you look at the way that information gets exchanged today in supply chain, there are ADI standards, there are Rosetta Net standards, there are ANSI standards. There is no one single way of, let's say, even exchanging a PO, right? You go to Europe, you find, Rosetta Net standards. If you go to some other place, it will be EDI standards. Now, there is definitely a challenge of, multiple platforms being formed, but I'm sure the interoperability solutions that are getting developed also in parallel will solve a lot of those problems. But at the end of the day, you're very right. It will be, this will be one of the challenges of how do we find interoperability between platforms as more and more of them, start building and people start building their own ecosystems.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. What you explained, is it live? That's question one. And question two is, can this be solved by a single platform, and does it need a blockchain at all? I mean, all the players can come on a platform and transact. Does it really need a blockchain?
Yes, so the answer to the first question is yes, it is live. I will not be able to share more details, maybe we can chat over a cup of coffee, but more importantly, the second question, right, and that is a question that a lot of people ask. Why do you need, blockchain for that? Can I not have, let's say, even a SharePoint? Can I not store my POs on a SharePoint? The answer is yes, you can do that. But how do you then make sure that, whenever there's a change that happens, you are completely aware of that? How do you control changes to that? How do you control changes to a PO? How do you make sure that though the records are not tampered with? Even today, I store PO in my database. Let's say I'm a carrier, and you are a shipper, even you store the same PO in your own systems. What blockchain brings really is, I see what you see. We are all looking at the same data over there. There is absolutely no question of you storing some data in your systems and somebody else in theirs. It's one single shared distributed ledger, which is tamper evident, which is secure, which is in which even if somebody makes a change, I can trace back with a lot of trust from where the change came from. So it's a very different way of looking at, okay, I don't need to share data any longer. It's like I see what you see, as I said. So
what I mean is, if you take an example from the financial industry, like a cooperative, a Visa, or sorry, rather a SWIFT, or a Visa, or MasterCard, what are they? They're nothing but a cooperative of all the banks. And they all agree on a common standard and they transact with each other. Similarly, there could be a single, in fact, no sharing or no sending anything. A central platform can store the right contract, the true contract, or whatever, the true record. And that can be reference for everyone, so that there's no... what I'm saying is that, why do I need to share? Everybody can refer to it, meaning. See, you have so many merchants on Amazon, so many customers on Amazon. Nobody stores locally anything. They all go to Amazon and check.
Yeah, if you look at the problem that I described, if the data was so pure and so trustworthy, there wouldn't be any disputes in the whole ecosystem. The very fact that even today I have billions of dollars stuck in, could be shipping disputes, could be inventory reconciliation disputes, could be financial claims arising out of a marketing development fund. The very fact that even today there are disputes and there is so much of reconciliation required is essentially because you are storing data in different places and that getting multiplied across every participant. What we are now talking about here is really the same data source that I am looking at and I am going to transact on. So again, it's a very different way of looking at that data today. It's my data, it's your data, it's his data as well. So there is no question of that data not getting trusted. And so all the reconciliation challenges that we talked about, they simply go away. A lot of things that require matching of papers, matching of data from different systems can be absolutely done away with. It's, as I said, it's a very profound change in the way that we conduct business today in supply chain, and it will, it is, it takes a little bit of time to really imagine how that will work. Yes, and yes, and these are all permission blockchains, all enterprise-grade permission blockchains. We are not talking about public blockchains over here. So yes, and very right. I mean, as a carrier, I would not like to disclose my terms and conditions with one customer with the other, and so that can be taken care of through channels in the blockchain. Yeah. Sorry?
Privacy option.
Option of securing the data over the
Yeah,
blockchain.
yeah,
like
absolutely.
Just the two parties can see.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the tenets I mentioned about blockchain, that I can control who gets to see the data.
Yeah, so to build on this further, right, the last point that we were discussing, there are suppliers, let's talk about the FMCG industry. Suppliers would be servicing maybe Unilever, suppliers would be servicing P&G, and they'd be common, right?
Yes.
Similarly, transporters who are dealing with, say, a Unilever or a P&G, again, would be common.
Yes.
So what are your thoughts on having an industry-wide blockchain coming into place? Because one of these FMCGs probably would have to take a lead to form that kind of a blockchain and get others onboarded.
Yes,
and we don't feel that there is enough incentive for any one of us, to go ahead and take that lead as of now.
Very, very true. I mean, absolutely. So is that the way that industry will evolve in the next 10 years? I don't know, might, but the way that you just described is absolutely. So if you look at the use case from only an, let's say, a customer point of view, and if you really expand that to the whole industry, I can actually have industry-wide use cases. And I mean, FMCG is just one such industry. We are in the process of talking to other industries, which is, let's say, a semiconductor industry. The way that you share data today with your end customers, you wouldn't really want to share, let's say, what was my recipe for the perfect manufacturing of the chip. I don't want to share that. So because of that, a lot of inefficiencies creep in. I'm not ready to share, let's say, the parameters in which I run my process. I won't share that with my customer. If there is a way of sharing that data in an anonymous way, I can actually do a lot of efficiency improvements within my factory today. So tomorrow, we definitely feel that blockchain will absolutely pave a way for industry-wide networks than just, let's say, a couple of organizations coming together. True.
Question would be just kind of topping up his question. Now, from a single endpoint customer, like I as a logistic provider or a distributor, could benefit from a blockchain solution. But if I have one-to-many relationship, let's say, I'm a transporter, which provides services to 10 other customers. While for customer A, he has visibility to exactly what we interacted and transacted. But if I'm going to put my data in different platforms, how does it help me consolidate my own performance? That's another problem that we're creating if we're not using a industry standard platform.
If you take the case of how the freight industry evolved, right? How do I really ensure that there's a full truckload, or when the ship goes, how do I ensure that the capacities in the trailers or could be in the RRO trailers is optimal and it is optimally used? So initially there were a lot of inefficiencies, and then people started trading those capacities, doing reverse auctioning. So they opened up, so that's the reason that the whole intermediaries, were born, right? So the intermediaries would then do a reverse auction on the capacity. So what is the need for that? If you really think about it, all the intermediation that happens today in supply chain is essentially because people don't share data in a trustworthy way with my ecosystem players. If in a perfect world, if that is available to everybody, I can really this can really get disrupted in the way that the intermediaries just get done away with. And I have visibility to a trustworthy data that I can base my decisions on. So just the way that industry has evolved, same thing and the same way, we see the effects getting multiplied in other areas of supply chain as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Vinay.
Thank you.